Hello everyone and welcome to this week's episode of The Congregation. My name's Ryan MacLeod of the Clan MacLeod, and if this is your first time watching an episode of The Congregation, basically what this is a letter writing show about video games and everything video game adjacent. Now, in these early days of the show, with very little in terms of subscribers, obviously we don't have any letters to read out on air, so we're using articles in lieu of this. If you're watching this after the fact though, feel free to write in if you want any of your letters read out on the show. Again, we discuss anything about video games or adjacent to video games. One of the articles we're going to read today is one of our first ones about something adjacent to video games. So with that little disclaimer out of the way, folks, I think we'll just dive into our first article of the day. Before I do, you may notice if you've watched one of the older episodes, we're trialing a new setup here, just with a little montage of my favourite games across the older generations. It's a work in progress. I can see there's a bit of haziness around the outside there, but like everything in these early days, it's all just trial and error, isn't it? And I was running out of time before this episode, so I thought I would just hammer through with that. Right, let's have a look here. So our first article today comes from Nolan Chance. It was written in 2017 for nintendosoup.com. It's called The Life and Death of Toys to Life. Just a few days ago, on the 18th of October, another Toys to Life franchise bit the dust. The short-lived LEGO Dimensions series was a well-received series, yet its lifespan stood at a pitiful short 2 years. It was a good 2 years nevertheless. The death of a Toys to Life franchise is something that cuts deep into me. Having a kid running around in the home, the first aisle he would always run up to at Toys R Us is the Toys to Life section. Although our differences differ, he much prefers the crummy Skylanders. I always took to the Amiibo section. Toys to Life franchises are in a deplorable state. Again, this was 2017. LEGO Dimensions was not the first major Toys to Life franchise to be shut down in recent times. The mighty behemoth Disney Infinity was forced to cease production after 3 solid games and 118 individual figures out in the wild. Its 3-year run brought figures from Disney Classics, Marvel Studios, and even the Star Wars franchise to the table. If such big name characters cannot even save Disney Infinity, is there any hope for the future of Toys to Life? Even Skylanders, who had long been the poster child for Toys to Life, decided to take a quiet 2017, with no new games announced. After 6 long years of making Toys to Life figurines, the elder in the house realised that the consumers are starting to feel the fatigue already. The only franchise standing strong at the moment with the new figures still coming out this year is Nintendo's line of Amiibo figures, and even they are seeing a dip in sales in recent times. From a statistical standpoint, it would seem that Toys to Life franchises is indeed walking the long road to their graves. Interest in Toys to Life is only natural. Video games are static, digital, and non-physical. Your influence in the world is only as fast as your fingers can move. The novelty that Toys to Life brings to the table is the ability to connect physical toys that you play with into your video game journey. With any novelty, it is bound to wear off. From the first case study of LEGO Dimensions and Disney Infinity, companies should already be aware of this. Your $1 million character does not matter if your product is not innovative. LEGO Dimensions crashed into the living room with innovation, but what next? Harking back at Disney Infinity, from the first production figures to the last, they are the same old NFC plastic figures. For the first year or so, it is alright, but after the third game, you start to realise it is the same thing over and over again. People get bored. Before you know it, sales slump. After all, who would want to pay $60 and up for what is essentially the same thing? And $12.99 for each additional figure. It is too costly and totally not worth it. Stock stays on the shelves and franchises die. But you may say Skylanders has been doing this for 6 years already and is still around. Again, this is 2017. Unlike Disney Infinity, Skylanders contains suitable innovation that continues to trigger the player's intrigue in the franchise. By the third year, Activision knew for well that they had to innovate to keep the players, and that's where Swap Force came in, hybrid mix and match that was a plastic static figure. With new and more permutations to play with, gamers were satisfied and wanted for more. Nintendo likewise understood that innovation was key. Although Amiibo took largely familiar outlooks, they were always looking at how to make their figures better. No other Toys to Life manufacturers will think of using yarns for their figures. Neither would they think that not a squishy character in a game should be just as squishy in real life. Nintendo's Amiibo figures innovate through their build. I think he's referring to the Yoshi that they released for the Amiibo. Nintendo's Amiibo figures also innovate through gameplay. Every Amiibo behave differently in different games. While most unlock some sort of skin or items, they have shown capability to innovate wherever possible. For example, in Animal Crossing Amiibo Festival, which other games would actually make you race to tap your Amiibo card into the NFC reader to answer quiz questions. The ability for Amiibo to behave differently in different games is open to innovation unlike any other. Despite the doom and gloom, there is still a bit of confidence left in the Toys to Life market. As I have mentioned earlier, the key to winning in the Toys to Life market is innovation, and we have seen quite a bit of it. Just recently, Toys to Life newcomer Lightseekers burst onto the market with innovative new features, blurring the line between physical and digital. The Bluetooth figures interact with the game, even without a base, and could tell when was the last time you have played with it. Even Ubisoft has given the Toys to Life market a try with Starlink Battle for Atlas, due next year, 2018. The game will allow players to build their own modular spacecraft and customize it on the go as they need. Such innovation will pique consumer interest and continue to bolster the Toys to Life market. At the same time, it would also mean that the giants currently dominating the arena will have to innovate as well. If Skylanders return from its hiatus with just another Skylanders game, it would more or less spell the end of it as consumers are no longer impressed by it. Likewise, if Nintendo showed that their Amiibo can no longer innovate and contribute to their gameplay experience, even with their $1 million IP cannot help it succeed. There's a reason why their Animal Crossing Amiibo range did not do as well as the others after all. On top of the lack of functionality, it lacks innovation. Hopefully, Toys to Life manufacturers can squeeze their creative juices and bring about greater gameplay experience for all of us. As consumers, we don't mind gimmicks. Even the best of us will pay for it. But we want a new gimmick each time. And again, that comes from Nolan Chance over at Nintendo Soup. So a few little takeaways from that. I'll start just by giving my background with the Toys to Life franchise. The first time I genuinely came along the Toys to Life sort of genre was when I was working at a games specialist retailer over here in the UK. And basically kids were just trading them in left, right and centre. And we would take them in for less than £1 each. Less than $2 US. And when you looked at the price of these new ones, they were like £15 each, $20 US. And it piqued my curiosity because these were cool looking little figures and I had no idea what they were for. Anyway, I think I remember borrowing a second-hand copy from my place of work and took it home because you could borrow games from there for up to 2 nights, I think it was. Anyway. Gameplay was not for me. I can barely remember at this point. I just remember screenshots taken by my mind, basically. But one game I did go on to later try because I seen it for pretty cheap. That had like a bundle was Disney Infinity, which Nolan mentioned in his article here, and that gameplay in that was pretty good. I mean, it wasn't amazing. It was a basic platformer, for more or less. But I remembered then that I played a game not too dissimilar from that a few years before on the Xbox 360, and that was Toy Story 3. What they essentially done was took this, what was essentially a marketing tie-in video game that, Pixar had no interest in. It's just, alright, get out there to promote our Toy Story 3 movie. But the game itself was actually fairly tight, if I remember correctly. I mean, we're talking over a decade at this point here. But clearly, I must have been alone in that because they basically took that game engine, took that gameplay, and made Disney Infinity off the backbone of it. Now, as I was saying, this article was a few years ago now, and from what I could tell, doing a bit of research on the run-up to doing this episode, Skylanders is effectively dead. I think it was very obvious it was coming because, keeping the attention of children is always a difficult task. And if we remember that Skylanders started nearly a decade ago, those 8-year-olds are now 18. They're not going to keep playing Skylanders. So it's fair to say that Skylanders and our Toys to Life franchises weren't able to capture the older generation. And I'm going to blame Fortnite. Because if you look at Fortnite, it's the very same graphical style as most of those Toy to Life games. It's very cartoony. The characters you can buy and get in Fortnite do kind of look like digitized toys. I guess the last thing I want to say about this is that one other thing. Nolan did mention in this article that Amiibo has been paving the way for innovation through how each of the Amiibo interacts with your Nintendo Switch and the Wii U before that, I guess. It has come under a bit of scrutiny recently. About 2 or 3 weeks ago, they released the Legend of Zelda Skyward Sword HD for the Switch, and it was a bit of controversy because the fast travel option was locked behind an Amiibo. So if you wanted to fast travel in the game, you'd have to go out and buy an Amiibo. So it's all well and good having these Amiibo which add extra things into the game, like cosmetics, like Nolan was saying. However, when you're looking at what some might consider a basic gameplay feature, I think that's when it starts to get questionable. But I was thinking about Toys to Life a few days ago, and how inexpensive it would be if you were wanting to be a collector and go out and buy all these second-hand Skylanders and what have you. I think there's a potential way forward for it, not through the children's market. If you think about the marketplace these days for things like Hot Toys and Prime One, proper collector standees and figures and what have you. Imagine if you were to create a Toys to Life game, but call it something like Collectors to Life, where it's basically the Toys to Life genre, but instead of toys, you've got collector's items, maybe charge them at about $30 or $40 each. And as for the game itself, make it something that also specifically targets adults. Imagine a Dark Souls game where the game itself, ship the game by itself, your usual $60, $70, and have a few basic characters or classes, your typical warrior, rogue, cleric, things like that. But then sell collector's standees like this, which act like Amiibo. So let's just say a dragon hunter. Let's pull one out there. And then you could put that into your game instead. I think that would be really cool. Now, I don't think that necessarily it would be gangbusters, but I think that would be a good thing, if anything, because we've seen when something burns too fast and too bright, things like Skylanders, things like the rhythm music genre like Guitar Hero and Rock Band, when things are almost too successful, they burn fast, they burn bright, and then they die, and regularly they don't go the way of the phoenix. But if you had something which catered to a very particular niche audience, now again we're talking about the actual figure aspect here, the game itself would, if we're going with the sort of Dark Souls, Bloodborne kind of genre, would appeal to what is a pretty significant market to be had now. But I think that could work, and I could easily see myself buying a shelf and lining them with these standees, but obviously it would live and die on the creativeness of the development team. Who knows, maybe someone from Software out there is looking for the next thing after Elden Ring. I know I certainly would like to see something like that. Right, on our next article. Pick one at random here. Here we go. Aha! Okay. I mentioned at the start of this show we're going to do our first kind of topic that's video game adjacent. This one comes to us from Andrew Shaw over at The Digital Fix. By 1994, video games were a rising presence in pop culture, finally recovering from the major cultural slump they suffered when Atari crashed and burned in the early 80s. So it was only a matter of time before Hollywood tried to cash in. They had already tried with Super Mario Bros. In 1993, and I am sure we will get to that one day, referring to this article. But at this point in history, there was really only one game dominating the minds of young gamers with money to burn. Street Fighter 2. The iconic cast of characters, the simple but captivating stories being told, and the dynamic action, it all lent itself so perfectly to a movie adaptation. So why did we end up with Street Fighter 1994? The concept behind this movie is a curious one, transplanting the cast of Street Fighter into what amounts to a Bond movie. Why this was the agreed upon approach is beyond me. The Street Fighter tournament is not remotely a factor in the movie's story. This is a story about averting world domination, which massively overcomplicates a simple and perfectly cinematic story. Do they seriously expect us to believe a pseudo-Bond style storyline is a more appropriate fit for the franchise than following the framework of Enter the Dragon? Is Roger Moore really a better direction over Bruce Bloody Lee? This change naturally necessitates a lot of huge changes to the character roster. I will say up front that all of this was incredibly dispiriting to an adolescent Andrew, who had invested so much time and passion into these characters and their backstories. Character roles and motivations are completely altered. Ryu and Ken are now a pair of con men rather than the dedicated students of martial arts. Additionally, core rivalries are swapped around for no clear reason. Why is Ken paired off against Sagat when the one-eyed Muay Thai fighting machine is famously the nemesis of Ryu, forcing Ryu to square off with Vega for no real reason? Is it Ryu or Ryu? It's tomato in my opinion. I'm sure you can correct me in the comments. That is mere fanboy nitpicking, and I acknowledge that, but there's no defending how Chun-Li was handled. She was somehow downgraded from a gutsy Interpol agent out for revenge to a gutsy news reporter out for revenge. Why did they think a reporter would fit into the story better than a cop? How did that improve the story? All it seemed to do was give a hugely important female character protagonist an ill-fitting role, forcing her participation to feel shoehorned in rather than absolutely vital. It did a disservice to her importance as a character, and her place in pop culture history. This is the one change that actually annoys me far more today than it did on release, and I was already annoyed about it on release. It is hard to believe that a movie with such a rotten reputation could come from Steven D'Souza, one of the co-writers of Die Hard, arguably one of the greatest movies of all time. D'Souza suggested the elements from the games were changed or left out of the film to avoid repeating the mistakes of Super Mario Bros. Yes, this is definitely an accurate assessment of what went wrong with the pseudo-cyberpunk Super Mario Bros. Movie. It was simply too faithful to the source material. This refusal to embrace what worked about the games not only neutered the simple but compelling personal stories driving these characters, it is also, unfortunately, Street Fighter's greatest selling point. The visually dynamic, super-powered fight moves are nowhere to be seen. This movie is very mundane in feeling in terms of action. We get gunfights and slow-paced fistfights rather than the frantic explosions of colour that grace arcade cabinets and the 16-bit consoles around the world. Nothing that made people fall in love with Street Fighter is visible in the movie. Most of the performances are terrible, though some are endearingly bad, like Andrew Barinsky's Zangief, who delivered the funniest line in the movie, "Quick, change the channel. Sorry, folks. Sorry. But one performance almost makes the entire thing worthwhile. Raul Julia received much acclaim at the time of release for his final performance on film, even receiving a posthumous Best Supporting Actor nomination at the Saturn Awards. It could be forgiven for fearing critics were being gentle to the recently departed, much beloved actor, but even today his performance is a rare delight. He knows exactly what sort of movie he's in. Where other actors are trying too hard to play it straight, Julia has tongue devilishly locked in his cheeks. Unfortunately though, even the raw magnetism of Raul Julia was not enough to save this movie. As a young kid and a massive fan of Street Fighter 2, experiencing this movie was one of my first great letdowns. I was too young to know why it did not work, or why it made me so mad as a fan, beyond the tangible details. But I knew something was wrong. As an adult with a deep and abiding nostalgic bond with Street Fighter 2, this movie makes me even more annoyed. It should have been so easy. A series of well choreographed fights, bolstered by decent FX budget, I'm reading it out as it's effects budget, using a basic tournament structure to support each character's personal story. Stories don't need to be busy to be good. It's a lesson Street Fighter 2 taught me from an early age, and it's something too many writers in Hollywood apparently never learned. As a gamer and as a film fan, Street Fighter is a 90-minute hit combo of disappointment. Sorry for breaking professionalism while reading that article. So that was from Andrew Shaw over at the Digital Fix there. Now, full disclosure up front, I am not a massive Street Fighter fan. I've played Street Fighter, I've played Street Fighter 2, I've played multiple ports of Street Fighter 2. It's probably like 40 different ports of Street Fighter 2. But first and foremost, I am a Mortal Kombat fan. And I can understand where Andrew's coming from with this, because I felt similar things during the 1995 launch of Mortal Kombat. I mean, at least Mortal Kombat followed the tournament structure that was so obviously missing from Street Fighter. But anyway, I digress. I'm just putting that out there first, that I am not a Street Fighter fan. So a lot of what Andrew was saying there about, the source material, basically, both when I watched Street Fighter when I was young and now as an adult, I just rewatched it recently, it is completely lost on me. I mean, some of it on the surface level is obvious, like the Ryu and Ken dynamic. They don't once put on their... Oh no, they do put on their gear at one point, but even that felt a bit like, okay, we need to do a bit of fan service here. But with that disclosure out of the way, I just want to say, I love this movie. I love this movie with a passion. I watch this movie at least once a year, and I am hard pressed not to quote every single line that comes up. I mean, I couldn't sit here right now and just spraff it off to you in a one-man show, reproducing the entire film. But it's one of those things that, even without subtitles, I just know what's coming left. Like during that, quick, change the channel. It cracks me up to this day. I think I could even do the big bison speech when he's patrolling around the table and he's like, not for power, not for evil, but for good. And I don't know why I put on an accent for that. I'm so sorry. But I think it's a fun little flick. And now I appreciate that if you're a Street Fighter fan, it's probably sacrilegious to watch this. But if you're a casual fan like me, who knows who Ryu and Ken are, who knows who General M. Bison is, then I would, if you've not seen it somehow, please go and watch it. And furthermore, here's another guilty pleasure for you. One of my favourite actual fighting video games of all time is Street Fighter the movie. For those of you who don't know, basically they took, the Street Fighter 2 source engine, and they basically just put the digitized actors from the motion picture on top of the game. They had to slow it down to make it work, so it was a lot slower than what you're used to playing for Street Fighter. But also the Sega Saturn, I think it went for the PS1 as well. But go have a little look at the YouTube video for that when you've got a time. Just one last thing as well. There's a lot of great movie speeches out there. You've got the Braveheart, They May Not Take Our Lives. You've got the Independence Day airfield speech. And then you've got Jean-Claude Van Damme, I'm not going home speech. I'm going to get in my boat and I'm going upriver. Let's end this segment. I'm getting too overexcited. And I'm pretty sure my fiance is asleep right now, and I don't want to get too excited, or I'll be in a lot of trouble. Go away. Technical difficulties. Okay, next, let's go for this. This article comes from Kellen Beck over at Mashable.com. It is called, There's No Shame in Not Finishing a Video Game. It's okay to leave a video game unfinished. Even if you like it, even if you really want to finish it, it's okay that you haven't. It doesn't make you a failure. Video games are meant to be entertainment. If the game doesn't suit your mood, drop it and try again another time. If a game is too difficult, give it a rest for a week, a month, even a year. If a game bores you, drop it forever. If you finish one, great. If you get halfway through, or even 90% of the way there and stop, also great. Chances are you paid for it, and it's your choice to do whatever you want with it. Too often we shame ourselves for the things we haven't done or have yet to do. Too often we put ourselves down for failing to meet some inane standard that we make up in our own minds. I used to get down on myself for all the games I left incomplete, piling up in the backlog like an ever-expanding mountain of shame. But video games don't deserve to make us feel like failures, and they certainly don't deserve that much negative space in our heads. Sonic the Hedgehog can tap his foot all he wants. Video games are often long, challenging endeavours that test players' skills, concentration, and problem-solving abilities. Perhaps above everything else, they test our commitment. The Witcher 3 is a fantastic game, one of the best of the last decade, and has sold over 40 million copies. It takes dozens of hours to finish the story, and it's more like hundreds if you really want to explore the world and complete every side quest. On Steam, at the time of writing, only 27% of people who own the game earned the achievement Past the Trial, which you get when you complete the main story on any difficulty. I am part of the 72%. I played The Witcher 3 for 9 hours back in 2015 when it launched. I just wasn't in the mood for such an undertaking at the time, so it fell to the wayside. I am a big fan of The Witcher 2, which I completed just a couple of years before its sequel came out. I was really looking forward to The Witcher 3's release and planned on sinking days of time into it, exploring the vast open world and hunting down all kinds of beasts. It just didn't happen. Years passed. When the coronavirus lockdown occurred, I thought The Witcher 3 would be a fun one to get lost in. I picked it up again on Xbox in April this year and played it for about 10 hours. Then it fell to the wayside again. Other games came up. I drifted towards perennial favourites like Rocket League and Counter-Strike, played games like Fall Guys and Among Us with friends, sunk time into new releases like Hades, and spent dozens of hours reviewing games like Paper Mario and Watch Dogs Legion. There's always something new that will sap my attention, make me drop another game into my backlog. Most recently I planned on playing through Yakuza Like a Dragon, and then going back and finishing Yakuza 0, a game I got roughly halfway through in 2019 but dropped. But there's a new World of Warcraft expansion out this November, so yeah. Unfinished games used to weigh on me a lot. They were like little neglected ghosts following me around, occasionally tugging at the back of my brain. I had a collection of them since childhood, beginning with Paper Mario for the N64 and Legend of Zelda Wind Waker on GameCube. They were favourites, but I never completed them, and I thought about them all too frequently for more than a decade. But even though I never finished them, I still fondly look back on my memories of playing them. The same goes for a lot of games I love. Dark Souls, GTA 4, Hollow Knight, Mario and Rabbids, Battle Kingdom, the list goes on and on. You don't have to finish a game to love it. I've accepted that some of these games may never leave this list, and the list will inevitably grow longer. To stop the shame of not finishing games, we need to stop equating unfinished games with failure. Leaving something unfinished is normal. We do it all the time, with plenty of valid reasons. Other stuff comes up, we get bored of it, it stops clicking, we forget about it. That's just part of life. It happens outside of video games too. Maybe you haven't got food from a restaurant that you love in a while because you're cooking more or trying other spots. Do you beat yourself up about it? No. Maybe you watched the first couple of seasons of American Idol and then fell off the wagon. Does that bother you? I hope not. Just move on. Maybe someday you'll jump back into your unfinished games. Maybe you won't. Either decision is perfectly valid, but you can't let one choice negatively impact your sense of self. There are enough things to do to actually worry about in life. At the end of the day, they're just video games. If you really want to, you can just look up the endings on YouTube or something. I have to agree with Kellen here. Now, the reason this got on my mind recently is I've been thinking a lot about this since I bought myself into the Game Pass ecosystem. Up until the Xbox Series S, so prior to this, I was on PS4, then 360, then PS2, PS1, NES, Saturn. There you go, that's my entire gaming history right there. Sorry. I used to equate my purchases as value for money. If I've paid £40 or £50 for a game, I want my money's worth. I wouldn't want to pay that amount of money, play a game for an hour, and then never play it again. And that's how I would equate it up in my mind, rather than failure. I think a lot of people would equate with failure, as Kellen was saying there. But for me, it felt like I was wasting my money by buying this game and not at least reaching the end of it. That was a bigger issue for games that I didn't necessarily enjoy. Sometimes there's games that I've enjoyed so much, but then I've not been able to reach the end, whether it's because of a difficulty spike or simply running out of time or running out of interest. A recent example was Red Dead Redemption 2. I've not completed Red Dead Redemption 2 because, to be honest, for me the game just dragged on too long. Part of that's my fault because I was trying to experience the whole game in one. I wasn't just focusing on the main story. I was doing side missions and what have you as I was progressing through the game, as they were coming up, as they were presenting themselves to me basically. And I think I was at like hour 60 by that point. And you know, if you do something for too long, even if you love it, it just eventually does get mundane, and I just had to put it down. There was a narrative reason as well. I didn't quite like where the story was going. I'm not going to talk about spoilers here for those who haven't played it somehow, but it became very evident at the halfway point what was going to happen to the main character, and because you could just see that like a train wreck in slow motion, or a literal train coming towards you in slow motion, I just kind of lost interest in the journey, knowing in my mind where it was going to end up. I mean, who knows, maybe it was going to be a blaze of glory at the end, similar to another game in that series, but I said that as if there's more than two. But I've been thinking about it even more recently. Again, let's go back to the Game Pass example there. Because I used to equate finishing games as value for money, I've had a paradigm shift in my brain when it comes to not completing games. I played the game on Game Pass not long after I came over, called Manhunter. Manhunter? Yeah, Manhunter. The one where you're playing as a shark. I thought that looked cool as hell. I couldn't wait to play it eventually. But when I was on PS4, I was like, I'm going to wait for that to go on sale. it doesn't look like a £50 game to me. I'll wait for it to go down to like 15 or 20. And sure enough, when I played the game on Game Pass, I was glad I made that decision, because it was one of those games that I got bored after about an hour or two. I felt like, right, I've seen everything there is to see here in this short thing of time. Now, I could keep going through the game. I know you'd probably unlock more powers and abilities for your shark as you went, but I didn't feel like the experience was going to get fundamentally different. So after about an hour or two, I thought, right, that's fine. Uninstall. Move on to the next game. And that little worry about value for money in my mind went by the wayside, because I'm paying my £15 a month for the Ultimate. So it doesn't matter how many times. And sure enough, there's been a lot of games that I've downloaded on Game Pass. Some I've downloaded and played for multiple hours. Obvious candidate Dead by Daylight there. That's kind of cheating, because that's a carryover from PS4 days for me. But then there's other games like Yakuza, Like a Dragon. I heard great things about that. It seems like a good point to jump into the Yakuza series, because it's, from what I'm told, what I understand, it's very removed from the mainline Yakuza series. And you know what? I was enjoying it for quite a while. Unfortunately, though, there was too many cutscenes for me. I literally had my controller down, or just tapping the A button to get through dialogue, more than I was actually interacting with the game. And I love me some Metal Gear. I love me some Persona. I'm not a stranger to narrative and cutscene heavy games, but Yakuza just felt like that little step over the line, that little extra straw in that camel's back. And after about 5 hours of gameplay, I thought, that's it for me, thank you. And again, if I had played it on PS4, I probably would have paid £30 or £40 for that open world game. That seems like a fair price to me. But I would have thought, oh, I've paid £30 or £40 for this. Right, I'll just get through it, and I'll just keep tapping that A button, and I'll get to the end. And I'm sure the storyline probably would have been great, but that's a large time investment. You know, I was 4 or 5 hours in, and from my understanding, I was barely a third of the way through. That's a lot of time, and you know, when there's so many games coming out these days, and more of them are demanding more and more of your attention due to live service elements and things like that, you kind of have to prioritise a bit more. And if you find yourself being one of these people who does get downhearted when they don't complete a game, like Kellen was saying, there are plenty of other games out there, and it's alright to move on. like Kellen said, you can go watch the enders on YouTube. Here's an example. My lockdown project in 2020, when the pandemic first hit, I thought, right, I'm going to work my way through a game series. What am I going to pick? I went for Kingdom Hearts. I bought the Kingdom Hearts all-in-one package, and I binged all the games over a couple of weeks. A couple of months might be more fair. It was a fairly short time. I went through it pretty hard. Now, I really struggled with the final boss battles in Kingdom Hearts 1 and 2. I really did. I really hate it in JRPGs when, you know, you can breeze through the game, no problem, and then suddenly you get to a last boss and it's just like totally overpowered, and you've got this choice. You can either go back and grind for a couple of hours just to beat that last boss, or you can go to YouTube and watch the last 10 minutes. I took that road. I'm sorry. I technically never completed Kingdom Hearts 1 and 2. But I sure enjoyed the rest of them. I should say I did enjoy Kingdom Hearts 1 and 2 quite a bit. They're showing their age quite badly now. There was a substantial difference when it moved on to the other games in the series, I must say. Anyway, folks, bottom line, don't like a game, move on. Don't put yourself through the torture. Right. So we've got one more today, but first, let me hydrate. Bit of ASMR for you. Our last article today comes from Danny Paz, and I'm sorry if I'm mispronouncing that surname there, Danny, and it comes to us from inverse.com. The article's called How Grinding Came to Dominate Video Game Culture. The history of grinding in video games dates back to 1975, but it didn't truly take over the industry until the rise of online gaming. Like a second job, gamers spent hours and hours repeating the same quests, defeating the same foes, traversing the same digital landscape. It'd be mindless if it weren't for an overarching goal, being rewarded by a random number generator gods with a random item as it erupts from the defeated carcass of a boss you just killed for the 100th time. We're talking about grinding, a completist purist by gamers who replay the same levels, quests and missions to slowly level up before taking on the actual next challenge that lies ahead. And what began as a gaming term has become an everyday saying, with students grinding through homework for good grades and co-workers complaining of the grind through endless paperwork in hopes of achieving a promotion. With Destiny 2, one of the grindiest major video games to arrive in recent memory, recently getting a major update in Shadowkeep, while the original game goes free to play for everyone else, what better time to take a closer look at the origins of the term that's come to define an entire industry, from blockbuster console games to addictive smartphone apps. For plenty of players grinding in Destiny 2 or World of Warcraft, that end result is a shiny new weapon or even a purely cosmetic upgrade to show off online. But grinding in role-playing games originated long before the internet existed. It can be traced back to the very earliest days of the video game industry. Grinding in gaming is inextricably linked to role-playing games where players work their way through expansive worlds that requires constant improvement to keep up with each new challenge. So it's no surprise that one of the first ever RPGs helped introduce the concept of grinding into gaming in general. In 1975, two students at Southern Illinois University released released D&D inspired by Dungeons & Dragons. In it, players create custom characters to adventure through a multi-level dungeon where they battled monsters to complete quests and find treasure. D&D is considered to be the first video game to include a boss fight in the form of a golden dragon that guarded a magical orb, which was considered the best loot in the game. D&D was also one of the first games to feature non-linear progression, meaning players can return to any level of the game to look for rarer treasure or amass experience points. This unique game design at the time allowed players to repeat quests and find better gear as they readied themselves to take on the Golden Dragon. In other words, all of a sudden, it paid to repeat the same task over and over for incremental gain. The concepts introduced by D&D influenced every iconic RPG that came afterward. A Calibeth World of Doom, 1979, Highlight, 1984, and, you might have heard of this one, Final Fantasy, 1987, all require players to rinse and repeat parts of the story to unlock new areas, loot powerful gear, and defeat tougher enemies. Grinding slowly became a fundamental aspect of single-player RPGs, even though its repetitive nature has been said to be the result of poor game design. But the rise of the internet and massively multiplayer online role-playing games, like World of Warcraft, added new and competitive social variables that made grinding even more tantalising. In 1995, the National Science Foundation Network opened the internet to game developers after initially only allowing government agencies and universities to use the network. Game creators can now build massive-scale games to support thousands and eventually millions of players. The mid to late 90s were rife with MMORPG releases. Meridian 59 pioneered the genre scope and first-person 3D graphics, which led to more mainstream titles like EverQuest, Asheron's Call, and Nexus: The Kingdom of the Winds. These titles not only required grinding to level up and become stronger, but players were encouraged to grind even more to show off their gear, skills, and strength. Gamers populated an expansive virtual world where they would show off everything they've worked by simply equipping new gear and walking around. It made grinding endlessly more satisfying. Today, the concept of grinding in an RPG has remained largely the same, but the ways it's employed by developers can make or break a game. Titles like Blizzard's World of Warcraft and Diablo are simply refined and much larger versions of 90s MMORPGs. The story takes a backseat to the desire to show off the rare sword you acquired by killing an extremely difficult boss. But in the world of free-to-play mobile games, grinding has taken on even more negative connotations. Free smartphone games like Clash of Clans and Star Wars Galaxy of Heroes require players complete hours of monotonous tasks to advance, but also offer microtransactions that let players skip the grind for free. Developers of these games call them free-to-play, but gamers have dubbed them pay-to-win, because choosing to grind will never get you further than choosing to spend cash instead. However, the concept of grinding in-game treasure has also spawned exciting new genres like looter shooters. These games take on MMORPG concepts, like creating unique characters and choosing classes or skills, and fuse them with the heart-pumping action of first-person shooters like Call of Duty or Halo. The result is a game like Destiny 2. Like their predecessors, the main storyline is second fiddle to finding the best treasure the game has to offer. Players often brag about breaking the games they're playing when they find the right combination of loot and abilities. And Destiny 2 Shadowkeep is another opportunity to jump online with friends and flaunt the gear they've grinded out. The negative connotations of grinding will never go away, but as long as your journey is full of friends, tense voice chat moments, and piles of shining loot in the end, there will always be gamers willing to grind. That was from Danny Paz over at Inverse.com. I have not a complicated history, but there's a fair amount of history with me and grinding in games. I mentioned this briefly in the last segment, but for those of you watching this individually later after the show. In JRPGs, I've got a bad habit of making it all the way to the end of the game, just kind of getting by on what's presented to me. I wouldn't go out looking to grind. I would just take battles as they come. Pokemon's not an exact example. The best example will be Kingdom Hearts 1 and 2, as I was saying in the last segment. But basically, I'd get to the end of the games, and then the last boss would be too difficult, and I'd be faced with a choice: so I can go back and grind for hours, or I can just watch the end on YouTube. But grinding, as Danny was saying in that letter there, is taking on a far more insidious thing in games. Just a few years ago, and I think as recently as this year, Ubisoft released a microtransaction where you could get an XP boost in their Assassin's Creed games. So the impression was they were deliberately making the game grindy to promote you to buy this additional DLC to speed along the game, essentially selling you, as Jim Stephanie Sterling says quite a lot, selling you solutions to problems that they create. So, like mobile, I'm not going to get too much into mobile. I'm more of a console gamer. Mobile isn't somewhere that you and I probably dabble in too often. But grinding, like typically speaking, I think we accept it in the role of RPGs. It's just to be accepted. I don't go in necessarily thinking, oh, maybe this is a game where I'll be able to beat the final boss after making it 60 hours through the game. I know when I pick up an RPG, that's a possibility. And if the grinding's fun enough, then yeah, I'll go back. I'll grind out a few more levels just to beat that last boss there. Sorry, folks. Sorry about that. Too much fizzy juice, I think. But I think the biggest issue I have when it comes to grinding is when it's the pure focus of the gameplay. When, as Danny was putting out in his article there, where the story plays second fiddle. When the focus of the game is purely on the gameplay loop. Destiny, the first Destiny game in particular, is a prime example of that. They were that focused on making this excellent, and it is excellent, gameplay loop and solid shooter mechanics. So focused on that most of the storyline was delegated off to a mobile app. You had to go onto your mobile, read codexes on your mobile to understand what the things are you were shooting at. And there's a lot of people that just like that chase, the XP grind and the loot grind. There's a lot of people who like that. But by absolutely focusing in on that market, you're leaving the rest of us out in the cold. World of Warcraft, here's an example. I am a casual World of Warcraft player, as in I log in once every year maybe. I never usually buy the latest expansion. I just play the last expansion that came out before that, as that goes free to play. But again, major storyline moments are kind of hidden in these end-game dungeons and things like that, which you have to grind to experience. You can't just go through the story missions to enjoy this, to enjoy the full scale of whatever story World of Warcraft's trying to tell. From what I understand, it's not doing a very good job at the present moment. So, grinding, it's to be expected at this point here. I just think we as gamers in a gaming community, we do need to keep developers and publishers in check. I think we highlighted as a community very well our displeasure at this XP boost in Assassin's Creed in the recent years. And sure enough, I don't think I've seen many other developers do stuff like that. Because, maybe Ubisoft themselves maybe took notice, but other developers maybe we shouldn't do something like that. Do you like to grind? Do you really, really like to grind? I'd love to know in the comments. Could you not care about the Destiny storyline? Do you just like delving in? I would be really interested to hear someone else's perspective here, because I'm obviously more on the impartial edging on the not for me kind of bandwagon here. Anyway, folks, I think that's the end of our show for today. Let me just have a quick look at how we're doing. Yeah, I'm liking the new backdrop thing. I think there's some improvement to be had. I think I definitely need a new webcam at some point, but we'll wait to see how the channel does before I invest any massive cold hard cash into something like that. But I just want to end just by saying, folks, if you've been watching the entire episode, then thank you so much for doing so. I've tried to avoid doing this, but if you have watched the entire show and you want to like and to subscribe, I would appreciate that very much. In these early days we are chugging along there on our little journey to becoming a legitimate channel. And also, if you want to send in a letter to be read out on the show, on the air, please feel free to do so. Use the email address at the bottom of the screen, or if you're watching this in the future, go check our latest episode to make sure that's still the address, because again, it's just temporary for the time being. But other than that, folks, I guess that's the end of our show for today, so thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you on the next episode of The Congregation. Bye bye.